With all of this in hand, we can already let EF Core read data from and write data to the pub database. I'll start by making sure that the console project also refers to the new publisher data project, and then I'll get rid of the initial hello world call. For this very first demo, we'll cheat a little with a method that's good for limited scenarios, beginner demos being one of those scenarios, in order to quickly make the database available. The cheat is that I'm going to instantiate the pub context, drill into its database property, and then call the ensureCreated method. This will cause EF Core to read the provider and connection string defined in the pub context class, and then go look to see if the database exists. If it doesn't, it'll read the context and determine what the database should look like, then go ahead and create the database on the fly. In my case, the database doesn't exist yet, so EF Core will perform that task when I first run this program. Next, I'll quickly add in a method called getAuthors, and I'll make sure that the program calls the method as well. This creates a new instance of the pub context, then drills into the authors DB set that we defined, and calls a link method toList. LINK stands for Language Integrated Query and is built into C# and into VB.NET. The toList method forces the query to execute on the database and returns a list of the objects. Once those are returned, I'll iterate through the list and spit out each author's name to the console. If I expand Visual Studio's SQL Server Object Explorer, you can see there's no pub database yet. Now I'll debug this little app by pressing F5. There's a short pause while EF Core looks for the database and then tells SQL Server to go ahead and create it. Then it outputs the message from the getAuthors method. But we haven't put any authors into the database yet, so there's nothing listed here, just the message that the console app spits out by default after it's finished processing. But when I refresh the list of databases in the SQL Server Object Explorer, you can see the pub database is there now. And drilling further in, there's the authors and books tables, and even further, all of the columns that were created based on what the DB context learned about the author and book classes. And using EF Core's conventions with some input from the provider about how to translate .NET types into database types. I've added another method called addAuthor, which creates a new author object. And keep in mind that because we're using the author type directly, you'll need a using statement for publisher domain at the top of the file. Then instantiates the pub context again. This time, I'm using an add method on the authors DB set to add this new author object to the authors DB set. So now the context is aware of this new author. And finally, I call dbContext save changes. That method triggers EF Core to open the database and push the author into the authors table. Notice that my program now calls getAuthors, then addAuthor, and then getAuthors again. Now when I run the program, the first getAuthor will still be running against the empty database. But after I call addAuthor, the second time I call getAuthors, it will finally discover some data and relay it to the console. So let's go ahead and debug the app again, and now I can see the output from the second getAuthors call, showing the author name, Julie Lerman. Now I'm going to go back and modify the addAuthor method, changing the author to our sweet dog, Josie, who is in Newfoundland. So I'll pretend that Newf is currently her last name. Now when I run the program, the first getAuthors call shows the Julie Lerman author that already exists in the database. Then the addAuthor method adds Josie. And then the second getAuthors call lists all of the authors. So that means seeing my name again and Josie. And if I open the authors table, you can see both of those names listed. Notice also that each row has the ID populated. By convention, EF Core knows that SQL Server will generate those IDs for me because another convention for EF Core is that a property called ID is a primary key. So I didn't have to worry about providing values for the IDs when I created the authors.